Welcome back to the channel. I'm Rob, this is 10 Degrees Warmer, and today I'm going to give you a look into what we spent on our recent trip to Singapore. We're David and Robb, and we are taking what we are hoping will be a 4-year sabbatical to travel the world. We've lived in and traveled to over 75 countries and territories over the past 30 years, and we are here to share our unconventional life of long-term travel to give you an example of what is possible. So a couple of things worth mentioning. One, just like always, whenever we talk about money, just a reminder that we are talking about living expenses that we incur while we're in the country. We're not talking about health insurance and Netflix accounts and all the other things that we might spend money on. This is not our total budget. This is just sort of the living expenses of what we're spending while we're there. We just kind of want to give you an example of what is possible for you to be able to spend. The other thing I feel like I have to mention, because this is Singapore, which tends to be, it's definitely the most expensive destination in Southeast Asia. However, I used to live there. We have been there many times. So probably these numbers are going to be lower than what you might do if you are going there for the first time.
Okay, let's get started.
All right, so I'm going to jump into the categories. There's not a lot of them. We were only in Singapore for 4 days this time. And so this is probably going to be a pretty short video because there's just not a lot of complexity to it. But let's start with the first category, which is our flight to get there. In this case, we came from Bali, Indonesia, so it was a pretty short flight depending on where you're coming from. That flight cost is of course going to be very different. But for us, we spent $213.75 for both of us to fly from Bali. So definitely not a terrible price. We were pretty happy with that. It was a short, easy flight. It worked for us. Next up is food. This is one of our favorite topics because everybody likes to eat.
I like to eat ice cream.
So Singapore, I have to say this, can be pretty expensive for food. If you want to eat out at restaurants can be pretty pricey. Even just sort of regular kind of restaurants that you go to are probably going to be at least as much, if not more, than what you're used to paying in other like kind of Western countries like in the United States. It can be pretty pricey. However, our favorite food just happens to be the cheapest food, which is great news, which is we tend to eat at the hawker stalls. So these are, kind of low cost local places to eat, and some of the food there is just incredible.
This food is amazing.
It is good. So good.
For eating out on the 4 days, we spent a little over $68, which isn't bad. And then we do buy a lot of food at grocery stores, to make lunches and snacks and that kind of thing. And so we spent another $31 on groceries. So we were just under $100 for food for 4 days, which in a country like Singapore, we saw that as a very good win. And we had some really delicious food. Next up are two categories that I usually talk about, entertainment and personal. Which entertainment, obviously it's buying tickets to get into things, and personal is buying like, toiletries and stuff like that. In this case, we didn't spend any money on either of those categories. If you're curious how we managed to be 4 days in Singapore and not spend any money on entertainment, check out this video, which is we made on free things to do while you're in Singapore, because there are some really fun free things that you can do while you're there to help your budget out. That's what we did this time, so check that video out. So we didn't spend any money on those two categories. Next up is local transport. So this is like taxis and subways. In this case in Singapore, we didn't take any taxis, but we used the MRT to get around. The MRT is great. It's in English. You can tap in with your credit card. It is very easy to figure out if you're used to subways at all. And so we spent over the 4 days a little under $21 for both of us, just kind of moving around town. So not bad at all there. And finally, accommodation. So this is probably going to be your biggest ticket item when you're in Singapore. We found a hotel in Little India this time, and I just want to say this is the cheapest hotel we could find. We looked all over the place. It was a little over $75 a night, so we spent $301.40 for the 4 nights. Accommodation can be a challenge when you're in Singapore. This is probably a good place if you have hotel points. You might want to use those here to kind of help out your budget a little bit. In this case, we were okay with this hotel. It was in Little India. We've stayed in places before. These tend to be, you know, when you get cheap rooms, it's cheap. They tend to be very small. Sometimes they have no windows. We stayed in one time. It was like completely tile, floor to ceiling, white tile with bunk beds in them. In this case, it was a little better than that. We had an actual bed. We actually had a window, although it was painted with green paint and we couldn't see out of it. I don't know what that was about. Although the room did stay cool, so maybe that has something to do with it. But we did have air conditioning. Like, it was fine. It was small, like our bags were on the floor, like right next to the bed. There wasn't any place to put them. The bathroom was tiny. It was a wet bath, so when you took a shower, like the whole bathroom got wet. But these are kind of minor complaints when you're traveling in this area. We're just kind of used to it. It wasn't that big of a deal. We spent very little time in the hotel. We were out and about and exploring Singapore, so we slept great. It was quiet. It was cool. We didn't really have any complaints about it. But it was $75 a night. So in total, we spent $680 just over, which is about $170 a day. If you take out the plane ticket, just to kind of help you focus in on the like living expenses, it was about $466, which is about $117 a day. So in general, we like to keep our budget to around $50 a day.
$50?
Again, this is just, you know, kind of those living expenses. In the case of a place like Singapore and your hotel is $75 a night, like obviously there's no way to live under $50 a day. So we do, in those cases, we bump it up to $100. In this case for Singapore, we still went over that. We've been to Singapore many times. We were anticipating that. This wasn't a surprise. All in all, we think we did pretty good. The difference, I'm sure we will make up as we go forward and move into Southeast Asia, where we move on to some more affordable countries. So this wasn't something that concerned us at all, but I'm just letting you know, to be transparent, you know, kind of what you can expect, that Singapore definitely is going to be expensive. And again, if you have not been there before, I used to live there. I've done a lot of the things. I've seen a lot of the places. And so it's easier for me to come in and just stick to the free things because, you know, I've been there. If you're coming for the first time, you might want to indulge in a nicer hotel. You might want to have, you know, go to some of those big activities that are, you know, fun to do and cool to see and might cost you $40 a pop. So you just want to keep that in mind when you're considering your budget. Again, like I said before, what we are doing here is not trying to give advice on how you should spend your money. Your budget is your business and you get to spend your money however you want. We just do this to, you know, our budget is kind of on the lower side of things, just to give people an example of what is possible. If you do have a lower budget, you can still go to Singapore. It is still worth going to. It is amazing. We love it a lot. I'm very fond of it, having lived there.
When I lived in Singapore...
But it is more expensive, so I just want to be aware so that you can plan accordingly. If you enjoyed this video, the best way you can support us is by hitting that subscribe button or liking the video if you've already subscribed. It really helps us out. We do release new videos every Sunday, and so we will be back next week with a new video. Spoiler alert, we are moving on to Malaysia, and we have a lot to say. So stay tuned for that, and we will see you next week.
Today and not tomorrow.